And here we go again. Starting Leviticus chapter 9 we're going to be doing today. Last week we finished up chapter 8. So we got through a lot there in Leviticus chapter 8, culminating in how it's fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So we took 2 different weeks with that. We're going to do the same thing with chapter 9 again. We're going to talk about the whole chapter. We're going to kind of lay out the basics of what's happening, and then the following week, we're going to talk about the theological significance and how Jesus fulfills all of what we're hearing about in chapter 9 here for today. So if you remember, chapter 8, we had the consecration and the ordination of the priests, right? Aaron as the high priest and his sons as the priests. And then we also had the consecration of the tabernacle itself, the altar, all the utensils, the tent of meeting, everything that was going to be used for the services to bring down God's gifts to his people. Now we actually have the divine service, initiated or set forth here. And this is a beautiful thing because beforehand we heard about the daily sacrifices for sin and burnt offerings and grain offerings, and we heard about all of that sort of stuff. That was just leading up to the actual installation, if you will, of the divine service. This is the first time that we actually see the divine service as the rest of the Old Testament Israelites will know it to be. This is the first time in Leviticus chapter 9. So I'll go ahead and read Leviticus chapter 9, and then we'll go ahead and talk about it. So if you've got a Bible handy, open it up to Leviticus 9. I'm reading out of the ESV, the English Standard Version, but whatever you've got in front of you will suffice. So, on the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said to Aaron, "Take for yourself a bull calf for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both a year old, without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for peace offering, to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you." And they brought what Moses commanded in front of the tent of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, "This is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Draw near to the altar, and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, and bring the offering of the people and make atonement for them, as the Lord has commanded." Verse 8. So Aaron drew near to the altar and killed the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. And the sons of Aaron presented the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar and poured out the blood at the base of the altar. And the fat and the kidneys and the long lobe of the liver from the sin offering he burned on the altar, as the Lord commanded Moses. The flesh and the skin he burned up with fire outside the camp. Verse 12. Then he killed the burnt offering, and Aaron's sons handed him the blood, and he threw it against the sides of the altar. And they handed the burnt offering to him piece by piece, and the head, and he burned them on the altar. And he washed the entrails and the legs, burned them with the burnt offering on the altar. Then he presented the people's offerings, and took the goat of the sin offering that was for the people, and killed it, and offered it as a sin offering, like the first one. And he presented the burnt offering, and offered it according to the rule. And he presented the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar, beside the burnt offering of the morning. Then he killed the ox and the ram, the sacrifice of peace offerings for the people. And Aaron's sons handed him the blood, and he threw it against the sides of the altar. But the fat pieces of the ox and the ram, the fat tail, and that which covers the entrails, and the kidneys, and the long lobe of the liver, they put the fat pieces on the breasts, and he burned the fat pieces on the altar. But the breast and the right thigh Aaron waved for a wave offering before the Lord, as Moses commanded. Verse 22. Then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he came down from offering the sin offering, and the burnt offering, and the peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. And when they came out, they blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. And the fire came down from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so a lot is happening, a lot of killing, a lot of offering. Excuse the squeaky chair too. It's kind of annoying. I'm gonna have to fix that. But a lot's happening here in chapter 9, right? You've got Moses. He always seems to be here, and it's because Yahweh has established him as his mouthpiece, right? And so the way in which Yahweh actually establishes his particular ordinations, if you will, or rites and rituals that he's setting up, institutions for his people, he always does it through Moses. So he sets up the institution of the tabernacle and the priestly office, and now the daily sacrifices and all of that. He's setting it up through Moses. So there's Moses doing this. We talked about how last week he's not really a priest, and so subsequently, every single time after for the ordination rites, it's going to be a priest who's ordaining the priest. But when there isn't a priest to ordain the first priest, there has to be somebody else to ordain the priest, and that was Moses. So we saw that in chapter 8. He's very involved in chapter 8. He's not quite as involved here in chapter 9. The reason being, this is at the end of the ordination rite. This is the 8th day. They have waited for 7 days, Aaron and his sons, to be ordained, and now that this is the consummation of this ordination and installation rite. So now there's a priest. There's Aaron. There's Aaron's sons. Moses doesn't have to stand in this priestly office when he's not the priest anymore. So he's doing less stuff. He's with Aaron present the whole time, right? He's conducting parts of the service with Aaron, and Aaron's never doing this first time service stuff apart from Moses. But Aaron's the one doing all the sacrificing. He's the one dashing the blood against the altar. He's the one doing everything. And the reason for that is because Aaron is the priest. And the reason that Moses is there is so that all the people, the assembled congregation, can know that, yes, Aaron has this authority to do these things. And they know that because Moses is standing there as God's mouthpiece, watching it be done and actually instituting and almost, you could say, orchestrating the whole thing. So Aaron isn't this rogue guy out there trying to do something apart from Moses or apart from Yahweh. Now, Aaron's the next most important person that's acting in chapter 9, right? He's taking on the mantle of conducting the divine service along with his sons. He's taking on the office of the priesthood. And he's working under the authority of Moses, who works under the authority of Yahweh. We had talked about that. So Aaron's not setting this himself up for this office. Aaron isn't setting this divine service up. It isn't his call. It isn't his decision on how this is going to work out. This is Yahweh proclaiming this. Then, just as the rite of installation and ordination, in chapter 8, we've got the congregation who's there at this first inaugural, there we go, daily sacrifice, daily divine service, which is going to be the precedent for all subsequent divine services. The congregation is important, and especially for this first one, this inaugural one, right? This service is established for the entire congregation to receive the gifts of God. That's the daily divine service, the whole purpose for it. But this is also a very special time. It's the first time. It's the inaugural time, right? And so this is the first and only time in the history of Israel, and I believe that's a true statement. If you read the entirety of the Old Testament, this is the first and only time that the glory of the Lord, it being unveiled without its protective cloud, without anything like that, because we don't hear that in chapter 9. It's the only time that the glory of the Lord appears to the entire congregation. The glory of the Lord appears to Moses, it appears to different prophets, sometimes veiled, sometimes not veiled, but as to the whole congregation, without cloud covering, without a pillar of fire by night. This is the first and only time that this is happening. And again, it's the reason is twofold, right? To receive the glory of the Lord, and this blessing is a wonderful gift. But they don't get this any of the subsequent times, right? Any of the other divine services, we're not going to have this. We'll talk about that in a second. So this first one's a little bit special, and it's special because just as Moses is standing there making sure that the people know that Aaron is being ordained and installed into this office of priest in order to conduct the daily divine services on behalf of the people standing in the stead of Yahweh, so too is Yahweh making his presence known to the whole congregation so that they might know that this being the very first inaugural daily divine service is instituted and inaugurated by Yahweh himself. And that means all the subsequent ones are too. So that they can have confidence that this is the work of Yahweh, and that Yahweh's doing his good and gracious work through this divine service. And then, of course, there's God. There's Yahweh. He's always the number one main actor in this, in his work. He always has been, always will be, right? That's how he was in the book of Leviticus. That's how he is in the tabernacle, later in the temple. And that's how he is in our divine service too. He is the actor. He's the one at work. Even though we've got a pastor who's standing in the stead and by the command of our Lord Jesus Christ, it's Yahweh, it's Jesus who's doing all of the actual forgiving of sins, proclamation of the gospel, and so forth. In the same way, this is what's happening for the divine service in chapter 9 here. All right, so the things that are brought forth, the ritual material, Aaron brings a young bull for his offering and his sin offering, and a ram for his burnt offering, right? The young bull's going to be different than other leaders of the nation or congregation. It kind of sets him aside as this priest. And then the congregation brings forth a male goat for their sin offering and a calf, in addition to the usual lamb as its daily burnt offering. So we see that there's two burnt offerings that are happening here. One's going to be for this particular first time sacrifice, and then the other one is for the daily sacrifice. They also bring flour mixed with oil for the daily grain sacrifice, and the head of the cattle and the ram as its peace offering. All right, where is this all taking place? You could easily just say it's in the tabernacle and the tent of meeting. That's true, but specifically, where is this taking place? It's taking place in the courtyard in front of the tent of meeting. That's where the nation or the assembly, gathered together. And so this right there in the courtyard in front of the altar is where they witness the acts of the priests. They hear the words of Moses. They see the glory of the Lord, and they fall down before him. The altar is the focal point of this whole first service. It's really kind of the focal point for every single service. Some could say, well, what about the incense inside the tent of meeting, the altar of incense? Yeah, okay. But where sin is being atoned for and the people's sins are being covered and forgiven, that's outside. That's happening outside on the burnt offering out there, the burnt altar out there. Maybe one could say within the Holy of Holies as well, but the Holy of Holies, and we'll see this later on in Leviticus, the Holy of Holies, the high priest is only able to go in there once a year on the Day of Atonement. So this isn't a daily thing that the high priest gets to do, to go in the Holy of Holies. So for the daily rituals, the daily sacrifices, the focal point is the altar outside there in the courtyard where everybody gets to see the sacrifices being made, the blood being dashed against the altar. And this is where Yahweh is promised to be with his people. And then the only other place that we hear about in this is the tent of meeting itself. So remember, the tent is rectangular. The Holy of Holies is set aside back here, and the rest of the place is the holy place. And in front of the curtain, right, here's the Holy of Holies. In front of the curtain is the altar of incense right here. And so this is where the high priest comes in to the altar of incense every single day and offers on that altar so that the prayers of the people, the smoke arise to the Lord, a pleasant offering to the Lord. So in this first very service, Aaron and Moses go and enter into the holy place, the tent of meeting, together. And as Aaron, the high priest, enters into the holy place, he's showing, and he's doing this with Moses, so obviously Moses has heard this from Yahweh, and so he's showing to everybody that the holy place is a place established and set aside for the office of high priest in order to burn incense upon the altar inside for the good of the people. So the place of the holy place is not just, hey, anybody can go in there and do whatever they want. This is for Aaron. This is for the high priest. All right. So this is happening the 8th day, right? The 8th day of the installation ordination event. 7 days previous were the days of ordination for the priest Aaron and his sons. Now this is the 8th day that's happening. 8th day is a very big day in the Old Testament and New Testament church. The 8th day of new creation. Paul talks about the 8th day. We reference the 8th day in our baptism, that the 8th day is the new creation. Old baptismal fonts, if you look at old baptismal fonts in old congregations or in the early church, they were always 8-sided, right? So it was an octagon. And so it signified this new creation in baptism. And really in the early churches, if you can find those, the baptismal font was a place that you walked steps into. So it was a big pool, right? So it was kind of a submersion sort of thing. Unlike what the Lutherans do now, which is okay. But you would walk in on one side of the octagon, down into steps, be buried, right, or go under the water, and then you would exit on the other side of the octagon. So it was this burial into Christ's death, raised to new life in his resurrection. Old creation, old Adam dead, new creation, alive in baptism. 8th day is an important thing. So the fact that on the 8th day is the ending of the ordination, and now the Lord is establishing this divine service for his people, it's an important event. And so if you see specifically in Exodus chapter 40, verse 17, you'll see that this is going to actually fall on the 8th day of Nisan, all right, which is the first month of the liturgical or lunar calendar. You'll notice, though, that the Lord isn't setting up on each subsequent 8th day of Nisan, do this thing as a festival to the Lord. That's not the purpose of this. This is to establish the beginning of the divine service. What's important that the daily divine service continues and takes place. All right, so we're just going to real quickly kind of run through everything that happened in this divine service for the next 5 minutes, or this inaugural first service, and then we'll kind of be done with it for the day. Aaron begins by presenting the offerings for himself and for the whole congregation, right? And this he does in the context, in the presence of the whole public assembly, of the whole congregation in front of the altar. And so after he does this, and after the whole congregation is convened and the offerings are brought before Moses, Moses then tells the people, so that everybody can hear in public, that God has instituted this service so that he can appear in his glory to the congregation through the performance of the sacrificial rite. You see that in verse 6, right? So there's this promise that God's going to reveal himself and appear to the people. And you actually see that taking place at the end of chapter 9, and all the people fall on their faces. The main part of the service, there's actually three main parts of the service. First, the beginning part, right, obviously. You've got Moses formally and publicly orders Aaron to approach the altar and to perform the sacrificial ritual of sacrificing, slaughtering the animal, and doing all the things that are needed to perform the divine service. Then Aaron performs the sacrificial rite, and he's assisted in this. So Moses first declares, Aaron, you need to do this, and then Aaron's actually going to start doing this. And he's assisted by all of his sons. He slaughters the calf for his sin offerings, performs the rite of atonement with its blood, turn the fat portions on the altar into smoke. And then took the rest of the flesh and the skin outside and incinerated it outside the camp. Then he slaughters the ram for his burnt offering, and he takes the blood and he splashes it against the altar. Oh, for the sin offering, remember, he takes some of the blood and he smears it on the horns of the altar to signify and to cleanse the altar itself as well. And so this altar is a place where sin is atoned for. Then Aaron, he's freed from impurities. He's freed from his sin. He's cleansed from his sin, and he's accepted by God as the people's representative. Right? So it's weird when Aaron stands before two different parties as a priest. He stands before God as the representative of all of Israel, and he stands before Israel as the representative of God. This is what the office of the priest is in the Old Testament. So then, as he's standing there, he brings up the four offerings of the people, their sin offering, their burnt offering, right? Both, and we talked about this earlier, both the burnt offering for this specific occasion, and then the burnt offering for the daily burnt offering, then the the grain mixed with oil for the grain offering, and then also the peace offering. And the peace offering culminated with Aaron blessing the people from the altar. And I believe it's at this point, although we hear Aaron blessing the people at two different times. And I'm not exactly sure where it's at. If it's at this point, I think it's actually at this point, where after he has done the peace offering, he blesses the people. And then he goes into the the holy place, and then he comes out and blesses the people again. At one of those two times, I guess it doesn't really matter, this is where we get the Aaronic benediction. We'll talk about that later. But this is when Aaron says the Aaronic benediction to the people. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Okay? So Aaron says this to the people this first time and all subsequent daily offerings. Okay, it's a kind of an important thing that we've got when all of the sacrifices are done, then we get this blessing. As this blessing of the Lord's presence and the Lord's peace to be upon the people. And they can know it for certain because all of these sacrifices have taken place, and the Lord said, through these sacrifices, my promise to you is X, Y, and Z. Okay, so then Moses and Aaron, they go into the holy place. Aaron enters into God's presence in order to bring God's blessing to the assembled congregation. And so then we get to hear this again. When Aaron comes out and blesses the people actually see the glory of the Lord. So the blessing, and this is why I'm not exactly sure if the Aaronic benediction or Aaronic blessing is before he goes into the holy place or after he goes into the holy place. But at this point afterwards, and maybe it's here because that would make sense, that when he comes out, he blesses the people again and they see the glory of the Lord. But we talked about this earlier. This is the one and only time that they actually see the glory of the Lord unveiled. Now, does that mean that the glory of the Lord is not upon the people ever again? No. It just means that they don't see and experience, I hate that word experience, they don't see and experience this theophany, fancy word for the glory of the Lord actually being visibly, tangibly present, right? They don't see this at any other time. But because the blessing happens and the glory of the Lord is shown to the people at the same exact time, the Lord is tying the blessing and his revealing of his glory together so that the people every time after this know they're not going to see the glory of the Lord, but the blessing has been tied to the glory of the Lord, so that when they hear this blessing, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you his peace. They can know for certain that the glory of the Lord is upon them as well. And they have all the promises that come with it. It's kind of beautiful how that happens and how the Lord establishes this very thing. And you'll notice I've said the Aaronic benediction twice. It makes it's familiar, right? You've heard this before. And that's a good thing because you hear this at the end of all of our divine services. You don't get to hear this at the end of Matins. You don't get to hear this at the end of morning prayer or evening prayer or the service of prayer and preaching or any of those things. You hear this at the end of the divine service. You hear this at the end of the service and where the word of or the service of the word happens, and you receive the service of confession and absolution happens, and you receive absolution for your sins, forgiveness of sins. The service of the word takes place after that within the divine service, and then the service of the sacrament, where Christ gives to us his very body and blood for the forgiveness of sins and strengthening of our faith. That is the culmination of the divine service. Without that, there isn't the divine service. Without the forgiveness of sins and the proclamation of the word, and the Lord's Supper, there is no divine service. With all of that, there is the divine service, and then you get the Aaronic benediction at the end of that. So every Sunday we get to hear that. Notice something, and we'll kind of close here. When we were doing just purely the online virtual worship, we switched. We weren't doing the divine service anymore, right? We weren't doing the divine service because the whole idea of this virtual, even recorded confession absolution, that's a little gray and fuzzy and kind of weird, but even more so, virtual communion is a place where you're kind of standing there and there's nothing but questions with that, right? There's nothing but, there's no assurance with that. Is this what we think it is? How can I be sure? And so we didn't do the divine service because we weren't gathered together to receive his gifts as the gathered assembly. But we did matins. And we also then didn't hear the Aaronic benediction until once again we are coming back together to hear and receive his gifts of forgiveness, life, and salvation, and the gift of Holy Communion. And then the culmination of that, we get the Aaronic benediction once again. Okay. I always think that these are going to be shorter, and they never are, and you probably turned it off 15 minutes ago, which is fine. But hopefully this ties us over until the following Sunday. Again, I mentioned on Sunday at both services, we're going to try and figure out some way to do in-person Bible studies, whether that's midweek or whether that's in between the divine services. I'm not sure yet. We'll keep doing these online Leviticus services, whatever the case may be, the Leviticus Bible studies, whatever the case may be, so that those who don't have the opportunity for midweek or in between Bible studies can still do this. So until next time, the Lord be with you.